Hello and welcome to today's webinar, looking into the 2021 SEL Telescope. I'm John Pickens and I will be one of your moderators today. Before we begin, I would like to tell you a little bit more about our webinars. Both Harmony and Inspire host these webinars where thought leaders and educators share best teaching practices and tools to support social and emotional learning. These presentations are the opinions and content of our guest speakers and may not necessarily be a direct representation of Harmony or Inspire. For best viewing of this webinar, it is recommended that you shut down all of your other browsers. Also, if you have questions for our speakers, please feel free to use the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. You can also download a copy of the slides today under the Handout tab on your GoToWebinar panel. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording within the next week. If you are watching this webinar live, you will receive a copy of your certificate of completion from GoToWebinar within 48 hours. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our panel today, Dr. Nick Yoder. Dr. Nick Yoder is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Harmony SEL. Dr. Yoder leads the research agenda at Harmony, collaborating with districts, schools, and other research organizations to identify the effectiveness of the program and ways in which data can be used for continuous improvement. Prior to Harmony, Dr. Yoder was the Director of Policy and Practice at the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. Welcome, Dr. Yoder.
Thanks, John, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to those on the different coasts. We are super excited today to talk about looking into the 2021 telescope for SEL. So you can go to the next slide. So to begin our presentation today, I really want to think about why you're here, right? We have all been going through a lot within the last year, and I'm always reminded of this picture. I think it represents kind of the situation well, where we're all in a storm, but we all have different resources, different equitable issues to kind of get through what that storm is and what it means for us. And so we all came here in different spaces and to learn different things. And so what I really want you to do is just to take 30 seconds and set your attention for today. Like, why did you come to this webinar? What are you hoping to gain from it? What do you want to take away from it? So just go ahead, take about 30 seconds and go ahead and do that. And then we'll go ahead and get started. Using this picture as kind of a framing reference. And if you want to share in your chat, go ahead. That would be really fantastic so others could see. Go ahead to the next slide. So thank you for setting your attention today with us. We do have a few objectives. We're going to try and do something a little different for this webinar. We're really going to try to think through what does 2021 look like for I don't know why I can't say 2021 for some reason. But what does that look like for a lot of different stakeholders, and what does it mean for us? And so I'm going to go through a few things that I've been thinking about with some colleagues around what does it look like for the SEL Telescope. Then we're going to have a conversation with Janna Moyer and Dr. Simyka Carlton to think about what their role is in social emotional learning and what are they seeing. And then we're actually going to give them time to talk about two different projects that they are engaging in Washoe County and Nashville Metro in their work around social and emotional development. So we have a great panel for you and hope you are excited to join in with us today. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So just to frame some of the conversation, when in the conversations that we've had about thinking through the future look like, what does our telescope look like? We definitely have some common themes as I go through kind of the 5 big buckets that we thought of. We're really thinking about what is systemic and emotional learning and how does that really impact teaching and learning, and how can we integrate SEL not just as a piece of, but integrated throughout, recognizing that social and emotional learning occurs throughout our days, throughout all our interactions. We're constantly using these skill sets within structured environments that are unstructured environments that we engage in. And part of that then is how do we then partner with in-school, out-of-school time, families, students in this work. And so this is a lot of work that we're thinking about with Harmony and Inspire as we engage in 2021 and thinking through our various efforts as we move forward. So go ahead to the next slide. So as we kind of thought through with a variety of experts and district leaders around what do we think 2021 is going to look like, what are some of those core components, we thought of 5. So I'm going to go through 5. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned, as well as some critical questions. So as we engage in it, it's distance learning. It's going to be cultural responsive practices in SEL, academic integration, adult SEL, and data for continuous improvement. So I'm going to go through these relatively quick, but just some highlights of what we are thinking about and what we're learning around social emotional learning. And obviously distance learning, I think, is a key one, right? I think we've learned a lot about what it takes, and learned about a lot about what it does not take in order to engage in distance learning effectively. I was just reading an article from the 74 that just talks about that it's just really difficult, and no one really feels like they're getting it quite right, but recognizing that there's been a lot of progress. Like, we are still able to build relationships. We still are able to focus and lean in on social emotional competencies. And we've heard a lot of our district leaders and practitioners talk about how they've adapted like our meetup system or our buddy up system, so students are engaging with each other either online or through letters or through phone calls or through drive-by, right? The people are really trying to still connect in a variety of different ways and recognizing the importance of that. And then also recognizing that it requires innovative solutions, right, for how youth will live and work. Because I think as we're kind of learning as adults now are going to be engaging in a lot of different spaces. And so we have to prepare students now to interact in these different spaces as well and begin prepping them soon. And they've just learned a tremendous amount. But we also know there's some critical questions that we need to answer to move forward. How can we better prepare and connect with families to support teaching and learning? How can we leverage the use of technology? And I think one of the really critical things is how can we connect like digital literacy skills and social emotional skills? So how are you aware of your own interactions online? How are you picking up different social cues? Because we know social cues are delayed and they look slightly different depending on kind of how you're looking. Usually I'm like set up like this on my computer because my bigger screen's right over there. But for you all, I'm trying to look at, it's kind of like navigating these new social situations and how to interact with each other. So it's really important to think through what that means and looks like. Next slide. We also know culturally responsive practices in SEL is a huge topic that's going to push the work forward. CASEL just updated its definition to highlight equity and excellence within its definition of what social emotional learning is and what it's intended to do. So we know that in order for SEL to be effective, we have to engage in culturally responsive practices, understanding what does culture mean for, or SEL mean for different cultures, different groups, and different contexts, and how we interact with it, right? To really understand the historical disparities that have existed and those long-term effects that they can have on students and families. And how then do we combat that through understanding our own implicit biases? How do we do that then through connecting with community partnerships, particularly those who really understand and have worked deeply within communities who engage with them in different ways, right? Like, so we're really trying to connect more broadly with those partnerships and community organizations. Karen Pittman from the Forum of Youth Investment, if you haven't heard her speak on this topic, it's phenomenal. So I definitely suggest you check that out. But that then brings up some critical questions that we have, right? How do we ensure that all students have supportive adults in their lives, right? Like, that's critically important. How can we engage and ensure at a systems level that all students have supports? How do we differentiate instruction to honor students' past, current, and future lived experiences, right? So we don't want to just think about their past, but think about their future. What do they want? What do they want to be set up for? How are they going to reach their goals? And helping students kind of make those connections now really help them set strategies that they can engage in then for the future. And I think always diversifying the workforce is always incredibly important. And we have to think about then the social and emotional environment that we're providing adults in order to help kind of diversify that workforce, is that deep SEL connection. You can go to the next slide. So with that, then adult SEL obviously is incredibly important as we move this work forward and thinking through about adult social emotional competencies and capacities in their work. I think the first thing that we learned is you all are amazing, right? Like, I'm just assuming there's a lot of educators on here. You have stepped up to the challenge, and I just want to applaud you. If this was a Zoom, I'd have that thumb up and the sparkly emoji kind of shooting out at you. Just thank you, right? All the great work that you have done, learned, leveraged. And with that, then we have recognized that you all are more attuned then to the social emotional spaces that you are in, right? Recognizing how that works in terms of how students are living, what spaces they have to engage in, and then knowing that that's important for you, right? And acknowledging that it's important for you to think about your own self-care and your own positive emotional environment for the work. And so we need to create working conditions for you, right? To thoughtfully plan lessons, to make those connections, to collaborate with your colleagues. I mean, I think one of the, we have heard from data that the mental health is large and huge for adults as well as students. So definitely kind of providing that support. And we've also seen, though, that there's a disconnect between adult perceptions of what students are going through and what they're actually going through. We've seen that in some data sources. So we really need to provide that time for you all to help think through and connect with students more thoughtfully and engaging ways to ensure that we're all kind of present with each other. So that creates these questions, right? So how do we create those working conditions? There are, what do we do with seat time and seat hours, and like some of those policy landscapes? But then how do we actually structure the school settings to provide structures for you to be able to lean in on each other, collaborate with each other, develop healthcare strategies, and then just capture everything that you all have learned to promote in the future, right? I just read an article that the Biden administration just asked the Institute of Educational Sciences to actually begin studying how the different districts and schools have created their distance learning plans, so we can begin engaging in that learning process. Go to the next slide. So the next slide is about academic integration. Obviously, another key issue, I think, as we're thinking about the data and what has happened. And I think a lot of folks have been focusing on learning loss, which I think is incredibly important to focus on. But I think we also need to think about the flip side of that, but like what learning has happened. And I think particularly this is really relevant for our social emotional competencies, because we have learned a great deal of competencies to navigate different spaces, how we've learned, how we've connected, how to kind of regulate ourselves in different situations where we might not feel comfortable, where we might feel alone, where it might be hectic, right? Like we've all had to navigate and use these different skills in order to learn. We also know from the SEL Alliance, the Science of Learning and Development, that learning is inherently social and emotional, right? Like you can't separate your social and emotional experiences from your academic or cognitive side. Our brain neuroscience tells us that they process through how we are socially engaging and our emotional experiences. So to try to say that we have a social emotional time or just a social emotional curriculum is kind of creating this false dichotomy of what learning means, what learning occurs, and how learning happens. Because it's really going to set us up then for the skills that we need for the future as we kind of engage in that, about how we learn to navigate our spaces, productivity, and the like. So I think some of those critical questions then is trying to think about how can we transfer social emotional skills from explicit instruction, like when we engage in harmony, to then other everyday practices that we're engaging in, to those instructional shifts that we're engaging in, to constantly reinforce and demonstrate how we are using a variety of social emotional skills in those spaces, in the natural ways that we use them, just to elevate them and highlight them when we are using them, because that's critically important. And that also helps us think about what are those contextual factors that of social emotional skills that will promote them or hinder our use of them, because we have to be in environments that allow us to think about and use those competencies in relation to academic instruction. Next slide. So the last one is data for continuous improvement. I think when COVID started and schools began shutting down, we did a quick survey of states and how they were engaging it. We found a number of states and districts who were actually like asking kids or adults just how they feel, which was really nice to see that it was not just asking about their connectivity, which is obviously incredibly important, or their academic needs, but just generally their sense of well-being, which we know is incredibly important as we engage, as we've just kind of talked about. So what are some of these data structures that we can use? What are some of the formative assessments that we can use on a regular basis? And recognizing that we need to partner better with various assessment companies and embedding assessments within our work. So for example, we are working with SEL Labs and the American Institutes for Research to try and figure out what are some better data systems and structures to move forward for teachers, and what does that then mean, right? So to those critical questions, how can we create these data systems for continuous improvement? What data is useful, and how can we ensure that it's used for effective coaching, to think about not only the explicit instruction piece, but also that embedded piece within the systems. So those were the 5 key areas that the experts had. We had an article looking into the telescope that kind of talked about them and provided some explicit district examples. And we have 2 of our panelists here to share their explicit examples, which we're super excited about. But before that, I'm going to pass it on to John to ask you a question.
Thank you, Dr. Yoder, for that energetic and informative SEL overview into the 2021 SEL Telescope. Before we dive into some questions for the panel, let's take a short poll to take a peek at what's in our audience's mind for SEL in 2021. The poll will appear on your screen, and you can answer directly on your screen, or you can respond in the question box. We will give you a few minutes to select your top choice. The poll is, in your 2021 telescope, what do you see as an SEL priority? Distance learning, culture and equity, academic integration, adult SEL, or assessment? Hopefully everyone is taking a moment to pick out their top choice based on what was shared by Dr. Yoder. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. And we're seeing a pretty close race. We have 30% for distance learning, 32% culture and equity. Academic integration is at 20%, adult SEL at 13%, and assessment is at 4%. Thank you all for sharing your results. Now it's my honor to welcome our panelists who will be sharing their expertise with you on what they predict social and emotional learning practices will look like in 2021. Janna Moyer is a social emotional learning specialist for the Washoe County School District, supporting district-wide SEL implementation. In addition to coaching teachers, she designs and facilitates professional learning for staff, presents at family and community workshops in both English and Spanish, and serves on district and statewide committees. Thank you so much for joining us today, Janna. Dr. Simyka Carlton has been in education since 1999 in the brick and mortar classroom and online since 2011. Dr. Carlton is a 22-year veteran of Metro Nashville schools and has served in many roles, including classroom teacher, dean of students, assistant principal, and classroom management specialist. Dr. Carlton is currently the social and emotional learning coordinator for Metro Nashville schools. Dr. Yoder, will you please guide us in our discussion with our esteemed panelists?
Of course, I'd be happy to. So welcome, Janna, and welcome, Dr. Carlton. We're super excited to have you on to talk a little bit about your 2021 projections and your telescope. So just to get started, can you tell us a little bit about what 2021 is going to look like for you? And Simyka, do you want to start?
Sure. For me, it's got to be endless possibilities with everything that's going on with the pandemic and literally, flying the plane as we build it. It's got to be endless possibilities, and just realizing how powerful and how strong we are to come through a pandemic and all the other systemic things that are going on in our world.
Great. Janna, what about you?
Yeah, I would love to echo everything that Dr. Carlton said, and just add that, in Washoe, as we move farther into 2021, we're really working to restore community and rebuild and strengthen the connections that we have, and ensure that we're creating the equitable learning environments we need for all of our students to be able to express their identities and know that they are valued and take charge of their learning. So definitely focusing on those connections and building the culture, rebuilding the culture and climate that we've worked so hard to build that was really kind of shaken up when the pandemic hit, and along with all of the other things that have happened in the past year. But we're really focusing on culture and climate, and we see adult SEL as a critical piece in building, rebuilding our culture and climate and equity in our schools.
So when you think of systemic issues that need to be developed and thought through, I'm really curious about what are some strategies that you all are engaging in at the district level, and or what are you hearing from educators that they need in order to support them in their work with kids? Either one can go, because you both talked a little bit about systemic SEL.
So I think for us is just being very realistic and laying everything, putting everything on the table for people to truly understand. I think what the pandemic opened our eyes to, or just really revealed to us the level of inequities that our district had. And so hearing teachers say one student needs additional supports and another student needs additional supports, and us really not having those supports in place, it just elevated the fact that our Black and brown children are still behind, lacking resources, materials, and the additional supports that they need. But not only that, our teachers need those additional supports. And so when Janna brought up the adult SEL piece, that's one of the things that we really had to go back and take a look at. We had so many SEL supports for our students, but we kind of had a little pocket of something for our teachers, and we forgot about the cafeteria worker, the custodian, the bus driver, those people who are part of that community. And we really had to go back and think about, like, how do we, we say know all student, like how do we know all of our people in our district, and create those spaces for those people also.
Janna, can you talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about your adult SEL piece and like what that meant for you all too?
Sure, and I just want to tie in there too with Dr. Carlton. I think one of the things that we've been focusing on, and it's been a strong tradition in our district, but it's a little different this year, is really student voice. Because as adults and educators, we know what it's like to go through the education system, but we have no idea what it's like to be a student right now because we didn't live these times, right? So we are really trying to listen to our students and hear from them what this is like and what they need. And that's another adult SEL piece, right? Like same thing. I was a classroom teacher for 10 years, but I never taught through a pandemic. I came out of the classroom right before this started. And so for our team, we're really trying to hear from our teachers and our students what it's like right now, what do they need, how can we best support. So a big piece of our adult SEL is really trying to hear from teachers and respond to their needs, because whatever amazing SEL we, professional learning we might have planned last year wouldn't be timely and applicable now. So one of the things we're doing with our professional learning and to support adults is really just curating the best resources we can find and trying to make sure that we are helping teachers and guiding them to the resources that we feel are really strong and timely, because we're not going to reinvent the wheel and come up with, our own supports when there are so many experts out there doing the research and doing the work but there's also a wealth of information. Sometimes it's overwhelming. So we're just trying to help make sure that our educators have access to the best resources available.
And so I'm also curious, like the next question in there is like, what did you try that didn't quite work? So I'm curious because obviously we had to do a lot of trial and error right now. So I'm curious, it doesn't have to be personal. It could be like a broad like concept, but like, what are some of the things that you've noticed that you've tried or other people have tried that didn't work? And how did you pivot in those instances to find something that did work?
So for me personally and professionally, it was quick fixes, right? Putting a Band-Aid on it and hoping that would work, or creating, like Janna said, creating sometimes a need will be out there and creating a cookie cutter approach, professional development or teaching learning series that, we thought that would fix it. Well, we'll focus on this now, and then we'll create this great professional learning opportunity in the virtual space and help teachers and support teachers. And what we really realized is that professional learning opportunity only maybe helped a few, but what we were missing were those elements of human connection and our teachers, that element of sense of belonging. And so we really had to think about meeting the needs of the teachers, and as you said, student voice and teacher voice, by just simply asking them, what do you need? And so how can we help you through this time in crises? But sometimes we're more reactive than we are proactive, and so we really had to take a step back and really realize that sometimes cookie cutter is not the best answer, and that sometimes fixing the problem versus putting a Band-Aid on it will get you a lot farther.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would totally agree with that, and I think that another thing we've seen in our district. We've spread ourselves pretty thin. So Washoe County, I don't know if everybody out there knows, is where Reno, Nevada is located. And this August, when we came back to school, we offered 3 different learning models for our families to choose from. So for elementary, families could choose full in-person learning or full distance learning. And then for our middle and high school students, they had the option between full distance or a hybrid model where they would come back to school another day, and then they had at-home assignments on their off days. And that has really stretched our teachers thin. It's met a lot of needs, and it's great that we've been able to serve our families really well. But we're hearing from teachers and students that it's been really tough to connect the way and have the same relationships that they had before with limited face-to-face time. And particularly for our secondary students on full distance learning, we've seen that learning in isolation through a standalone virtual curriculum without the consistent support of a trusted teacher just doesn't really work for the majority of our students. And our teachers are saying the same thing, the joy of teaching is getting to know your kids. So we're really working on rebuilding some of those relationships and supporting students that are on distance learning and making sure they feel connected and supported.
So that sort of gets into another question I'm really kind of curious about, is that there's this pull between making up for learning loss and supporting those relationships that you both have mentioned are so critical. So how is your district balancing those needs between learning loss and ensuring that relationships are present?
So we have a system called Navigators, where everybody in the district, from our social workers, our guidance counselors, they have a group of students that they connect with to see what their family needs are. And that person calls that student once a week. And so we document that. With learning loss, we're putting in things that prepare for summer school. But I personally, my point of view versus the district, when people say learning loss, what learning is loss? Because in this pandemic, I can assure you that a high school student, that they may have lost academic that academic content standards learning, but I guarantee you they learn perseverance and how to navigate this world. So I think we have to be cognizant of when we talk about learning loss, like what learning it was lost. And we're talking about academic learning, but there's more, you know, with social, there's more to learning loss than just that academic construct. So I think we have to, you know, that's just my viewpoint as far as learning loss is concerned.
Janna, you want to go ahead with that too? Like, how are you balancing quote unquote learning loss?
Yeah. And again, I just keep wanting to echo everything Dr. Carlton says. We completely agree. And we know that there's been so much learning throughout this whole process. And so in our district, when the shutdown first happened in March, our district put together some teaching and learning committees to really plan and guide our distance learning. That was sort of that emergency distance learning at the beginning. And one action that those committees took was to prioritize SEL by embedding CASEL's 3 signature practices into our distance learning lessons. And now that we've come back and we have these different models, those committees have sort of evolved. And right now they're chaired by a leader from curriculum and instruction, as well as one of our SEL leaders. And their work for this year has been sort of to look at focusing on tier 1 supports and academic acceleration so that we can figure out how to support students and keep them engaged and keep them feeling self-confident while making sure that they're accessing grade level materials. And so really that collaboration between curriculum and instruction and SEL is focused on supporting students to make sure that they are where they need to be with the academic piece.
I mean, that's awesome and great. And I'm wondering, how does that, from a district perspective, then how does that translate into the educator perspective? Because I mean, I think we know with systemic SEL and the work that CASEL's been doing is really focused on those systems level, systems at the state, systems level at the school, systems level at the district. So how do you see your work then, particularly in connecting those two offices, translate then into the teaching and learning processes with adults and students?
Well, I'll be fully transparent that I'm not the SEL lead on that project. So I don't want to speak to, you know, work that I haven't been so embedded in. But I know that one of the things looking at is looking at the standards and what is super essential, right? So backfilling as we're keeping our students accessing the curriculum that they need to be accessing, where do we see that they need support? And so our teachers are going through and looking at where do they need to sort of shore up those foundations and make sure that the students have the academic background knowledge that they need. And so I think this is work that we are really diving into right now and looking at for continuing through this year and into next year.
And then you also mentioned the 3 signature practices from CASEL. Can you share what those are real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like in any in-person setting, and we do these in our staff meetings as well, it's really across our district. You'll see these embedded in any meeting that you go to. And so we try to start with an inclusive opener, try to bring people together. So that would be the first piece. The second piece is engaging strategies and grade breaks. And so that was difficult to do with distance learning because we weren't always in live virtual classes, but we offered brain breaks that students could do with their families throughout the day or whoever was, you know, home with them. And then a reflective closer is the third signature practices to really help them reflect on what have they learned today and connect with people around them if there's someone home, and then looking into the learning for the next day. Those would be the 3 signature practices.
Great. Thank you. So we're about to move into the next section, but I want to give you one phrase to say, what have you, and I mean, obviously you're going to keep talking, but what is one thing you've learned that you want to continue? Just kind of a phrase or a quick sentence. Dr. Carlton, you want to go first?
If I could say what I've learned or I want to continue, it would be hashtag adult SEL / academic SEL academic integration.
Great, thank you. Janna?
I think for me, it would just be staying curious about everyone else's experience through this and learning what that's looked like and how we can support.
Great. So we're going to move into your presentations, but first I'm going to pass it back to John to engage everyone to kind of have you reflect on what you just heard from the panel. So thank you, Simyka and Janna, for your comments, and looking forward to hearing you talking again in a second. Back to you, John, real quick.
Yes, again, thank you, Nick, for leading that discussion. And ladies, thank you for sharing your expertise, insight, and definitely your passion for education and for learning. We're now going to ask our audience a question to reflect on what you heard and how these ideas relate to your goals in the new year. Please type in your answers in the question box, and I will share out some of the answers. What are you hoping to see or explore in the 2021 SEL Telescope? And as you all are answering your questions, I would say something that really stood out with me that resonates is when Dr. Carlton shared that, yes, there is content learning, but that some of the lessons that students, adults, pretty much all of us are learning now are so beneficial for us throughout our life. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Carlton. And we're seeing a number of questions, how to heal some of the trauma that we're experiencing during the pandemic. Lots of folks are asking about adult SEL. That's a very important topic. Also, how to be more inclusive, how to include families, how to include communities. Looking at cultural diversity and equity. Primarily the topics that we've been discussing, those are the questions that are coming up. Meaningful self-care, that's very important. Making sure we're taking care of, as our panelists talked about, making sure we're taking care of everyone in our building so that they can take care of the students that enter our building. More questions on SEL, focusing on learning loss. Lots of great questions, but we want to make sure that we keep moving forward. So thank you for your questions as they continue to come. Now we will hear a bit more about the incredible work our panelists are pursuing in the SEL field. Janna, can you please start and tell us more about your work with English language learners and SEL?
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, back one, if you could. Thank you. So Washoe County School District, again, located in Northern Nevada, serves approximately 64,000 students. And close to 11,000 of our students are multilingual learners, or you'll heard them referred to as English language learners, and 90% of them come from Spanish-speaking backgrounds. And on our slide, you'll see the term English language learners. We're moving towards multilingual learners because it values their language background and it's more of an asset-based term. But you'll hear these terms used interchangeably. Next slide, please. So on our 2018 climate survey, our multilingual learners self-reported significantly lower social emotional competence on 7 of 8 domains as compared to their peers. And I want to emphasize that these data reflect the students' own perceptions of their skills. Next slide, please. So this led us to do some reflecting and to ask a few key questions. First, how might these data reflect a cultural divide in how social emotional learning is taught by predominantly white teachers in our district and the way it is understood and expressed by predominantly Latino multilingual learners? Second, how can we increase the cultural and linguistic relevance of our SEL standards, practices, and lessons? And third, how can we continue to build capacity around unconscious bias and culturally responsive teaching practices? And we're coming back to these questions continually as we examine and revise our standards, practices, and assessments to better meet the needs of our multilingual learners and truly all of our students. Next slide, please. So at this year's Castle Exchange, we heard a quote that really resonated with our team. No decisions about us without us. And we've always had a philosophy of working with students as partners in their education. And I mentioned earlier that student voice has been and continues to be a driving force in our district. So we wanted to ensure that our SEL curricula was responding to the needs of all of our students, and particularly our multilingual students. So to study this, with funding from EdFirst, we brought together a team to engage in a collaborative process that included teaching an initial SEL lesson, soliciting feedback from students and teachers, adapting the lesson, reteaching, and then debriefing again. And this process has been really helpful in thinking about how we can better meet the needs of our multilingual learners moving forward. Next slide, please. So before I get into any specific strategies, I do want to revisit our ongoing project of revising the language of our SEL standards. Our standards have anchored social emotional learning in Washoe since 2012, and they'll continue to do so moving forward. So we realize that the importance of ensuring the language of our students is is asset-based, inclusive, and culturally responsive. And this is why we're working with partners such as our Equity and Diversity Department, the Offices of Accountability and Academics, Family School Partnerships, the Nevada Department of Education, and CASEL to revise the language of our standards. And we're looking really closely at the updated language from CASEL that Nick mentioned earlier as a part of this process. Next slide, please. So zooming in from standards to practical applications in the classroom, I'd like to share some of the high leverage supports and strategies that we've found effective for multilingual learners. First, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of authentic relationships. And we know how critical authentic relationships are for all kids, but when there are language barriers and cultural differences at play, teachers really need to make an extra effort to get to know and value their students. And they have to apply what they learn about their students by checking in on kids, knowing that they care. One student in our panel was asked about an activity where students worked on developing goals. And he said, and I quote, "Some teachers kind of read it and then throw it away after." So in response to an activity where he was setting goals and the teacher was learning about it, he thought, well, my teacher just read it and threw it away. So we definitely have some work to do in maintaining and really developing these important authentic relationships. And one interesting caveat we found in our study was that as our English language learning teachers increased their focus on social and emotional learning and relationship building, some of them actually reported an outpouring of student requests for help and support with personal issues, and the teachers didn't really feel prepared to handle those. So they highlighted a need for more trauma-informed training, and that's a big focus for us at the moment. The next strategy we have here is just relevance, and we found that in all the curricula that we use pre-K through high school, there were some lessons that contained cultural references that were dated or that assumed a set of shared experiences that may not have been familiar or relevant to our multilingual learners. And we found a lack of opportunities for kids to bring their culture to the classroom and to explore and share cultural and personal identities. So educators can model this by talking about their own culture and inviting students to share their experiences and values. So when I was in the classroom, in a lesson that I taught about the power of forgiveness, we discussed experiences with forgiveness in our own lives. And one of my students from Micronesia taught his group and then the whole class about the lava ceremonies play in forgiveness on the island where he's from. And that was a really powerful discussion because the students were thinking about how this abstract concept of forgiveness looked in their own lives and how we express it can be different in different cultures. And that brings us to the next item on the list, student voice and choice. Multilingual learners sometimes lack opportunities to provide their voice about their schooling experience due to language barriers, whether those are real or perceived by themselves and or educators. And some students interviewed in our panels reported a belief that even when teachers do solicit their voice about their goals or their challenges, they don't truly care about what they have to say, like I mentioned earlier. So, tying that back into the authentic relationships, if we ask our students for voice on something, which we should be doing constantly, we have to prove to them that we care about what they have to say and that we will make adjustments based on what they say. And that brings me to language scaffolds. So all of the things that we do to help support students in accessing other content can be used to help support with SEL. A lot of SEL curricula call for many interactions, but rarely provide processing time for students to really think and feel prepared. And if they don't feel prepared, they might lose important opportunities to practice their language skills. So if you're using Buddy Up, that's a really great system to help students process with their buddy before joining a group or full class discussion. And finally, collectivist mindset. We can prioritize cooperative learning strategies over individual work. And we can use strategies to make sure that all students are included. And when we're solving problems, we can ask students to take each other's perspectives and think about making decisions that are good for us as a community, not just to see what each of us thinks as individuals. And that's a quick overview of what we're doing to support our multilingual learners in 2021. And now I would like to ask Dr. Carlton to share about her work with social emotional learning and data, and in particular, how are we using data to ensure we're promoting continuous improvement in our schools? Dr. Carlton.
Outstanding, thank you so much. So as I share this data, this quote really spoke to me. So as we go through this, I want you to really think about data is not about adding more to your plate. It's about making sure you have the right things on your plate. Next slide, please. So how do we ensure people are using data? First, I can't ensure that anyone will use data, but what I do want to say is that data should drive instruction. It should drive your decisions, and data is not just quantitative data. It should be qualitative as well. And where do we start? Look at your mission and vision statement and your core values. Are they aligned with social emotional learning? Does everybody have a seat at the table? Now, having a seat at the table doesn't mean you have a voice at the table. It just means you have a seat at the table. So are we listening to everyone? Do we have the brightest student? Do we have the student that causes the most disruptions? Do we have parents who show up 100% of the time for any and everything? Are we forgetting about those parents who work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet? So making sure that you have everyone at the table when you start creating these core values, and then valuing differences. Find your common ground, set those goals and objectives, and implement things to the way so that everyone feels successful and valued. And then how will you hold each other accountable? What mechanisms, what will you put in place to ensure that everyone is held accountable for creating the conditions for learning for all? Next slide, please. So in Metropolitan Nashville Public School, we have a social emotional learning walkthrough rubric, and we use this tool to measure SEL and MNPS. This walkthrough rubric started 9 years ago. MNPS was a part of the CASEL 8, and we work with our CASEL consultants to create a walkthrough rubric that started with 14 pages to 7 pages to 5 pages, and now we're down to 3 pages. If you'll look on the slide, there are 3 areas in which what we measure to collect data: school-wide environment, SEL in classroom instruction, SEL in classroom and management. If you look, there are subheadings under each one, and these are the areas that are measured when we go through a walkthrough. Next slide, please. So in our walkthrough from 2019 to 2020, we have approximately 161 schools in our district, and we conducted 85 walkthroughs in 85 schools. We had 91 total right before the pandemic hit. We're in the process of going back and connecting with schools that we offer professional development in to see if there was a change from the previous walkthrough data till now. If you'll notice, we spend about 10 minutes in each classroom. Everyone is normed 2 to 3 times a year. So we ensure that everyone is on the same page on how we use the rubric. Next slide, please. So our district-wide areas, our areas of strength are in blue, and our opportunities of growth are in red. So you'll notice that atmosphere in the common areas and adult-to-adult interaction are areas of strength. We started in area 1 with a student to a student relationship and adult to adult relationships. But what we found, we weren't really measuring, we weren't really observing relationships, we were observing interactions, how they communicated, how they talked to each other. With classroom instruction, explicit learning and objectives, student engagement, and then for our classroom management, student behavior and behavior management. Next slide, please. So if you'll notice here, we wanted to make the connection between our SEL walkthrough and our key performance indicators, or our district standards. And one of our goals was to reduce exclusionary discipline. And so we work with our research and evaluation department to take our indicators from our SEL walkthrough rubric and locate correlations. And if you'll see here on the slide, schools that had high SEL scores had a lower rate of exclusionary discipline. Now, this is correlations, not causation, so I want to be clear. And the areas that connected to that were classroom atmosphere, teacher interaction, student engagement, classroom procedures, and student behavior. Next slide, please. We also want to make the connection between SEL and academic assessments. We noticed schools with higher SEL scores had better MAP growth. And we also noticed that schools had better MAP achievement. And if you'll notice on the slide, the areas adult to adult, teacher interaction and communication, as well as teacher as facilitator were key indicators of that. And so when we start talking about student voice, the teacher serving as the facilitator, allowing that student's voice to be elevated. Next slide, please. So what did we do with all this data? We created district-wide PD to strengthen areas of growth and to enhance areas of strength. What we did notice through all of the walkthrough data was that element of adult SEL. A lot of our adults didn't understand what social emotional learning was, and they also were bringing in baggage on their own, carrying their own pains and griefs, and that vicarious trauma is what we noticed quite a bit of. And so we really started working with our department, our trauma department, Dr. Mary Shinabori, and we started working with them to create supports for teachers. We created PD specifically for schools on their areas of growth and their areas of strength. We also reframed our discipline handbook to reduce exclusionary practices. Now we do collaborate with curriculum and instruction to integrate SEL and academics. We elected to choose Florida Virtual School as our academic learning for our students. And so the SEL department worked with CNI and infused the 3 signature practices, as well as aligned our SEL academic ICANN statements, as well as our academic, our indicators with our curriculum and instruction. We also formulated student focus groups, because what we realized is that we heard a lot from the adults, but we had very little information from our students. And one student said in a conversation, I asked him, what adult in this building can you go to for support prior to the pandemic? And he couldn't name a single person. He said, no one. I don't trust anyone. And so that opened a lot of eyes for that administrator for that particular moment, as well as others, to realize that we really need to hone in on the social emotional learning and creating spaces where students had a sense of purpose. And we also took our SEL walkthrough rubric and we aligned it with our teacher evaluation. I know all of you have heard, and if you're an educator on this call, it's almost like one more thing. I can't do one more thing. We are all stretched thin. And so what we did was we aligned our walkthrough rubric with our teacher evaluation system. And so when we talk to our administrators and we work with teachers, we share with them when we do the observations, this is connected to your teacher evaluation. And so this is a tool that can help and enhance your scores, as well as create a more inclusive environment academically and socially. Thank you.
Thank you, Simyka. Thank you, Janna. This was quite amazing. We are about to jump into our Q&A time, but I just wanted to begin asking your questions within the panel, please, for Simyka or Janna or myself. But I was just really struck, and one of the things that I've noticed, and particularly maybe because I'm a researcher, but in the poll question we asked about what you're looking into for 2021, assessment was the lowest. But I think what I heard from both of you is you're using data in a very strategic way to hear student voice, which I think was quite amazing. in understanding the experience of students and how they're engaging in both academic learning, but then also what types of relationships do they need, what types of adaptations do they need, what other things they just need, right? And so I think as we look into the telescope, we sometimes may need to think about what is the underlying data so we can ensure that we are building those relationships with students and provide them an opportunity to see and thinking about data in a quite a different way than how we've typically seen it. And there's definitely some innovative measurement things that are happening, particularly around like direct assessments and Excel labs with Clark, and some things here at Harmony. So thank you so much. I mean, I think that was really fantastic. I'm going to pass it to John to facilitate the Q&A. So Janna and Simyka, if you want to come back on too, and we can get some questions in here.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Yoder, Ms. Moyer, and Dr. Carlton for that engaging discussion and for sharing your best practices. We have a number of questions popping up. A few of those I'll ask. Examples of questionnaires for asking students input and what ages should be asked is one that has popped up. Questions about sharing your walkthroughs, if you're willing to email those out. And what I'd suggest, we're gonna add their contact information. So if there's questions that we don't get to, ladies, if you don't mind, if they email you directly some of the questions that they have in the interest of time, so we can respect everyone's time. So as we present their emails, if you have additional questions that we didn't address, if you may email them out and they will reach out. Also, there was a question about the curriculum that's used in Washoe County. So specific question to Janna, what curriculum do you guys use there? And questions about the data. So please feel free to reach out to our presenters directly, if you wouldn't mind doing that. And in order to reach out to them, their contact information is being shared via this slide. We will also send out today's recording of this presentation within the week. So you will have that presentation. You can go back and review what was shared. Their contact information is here. Also, for our next slide, we share today about our free resources at Harmony SEL, and we invite you to visit our site, register today, and check out our amazing SEL resources that are available to you at absolutely no cost. Again, I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We hope you can join us next month when educator Christiana Frank will share easy to implement tools you can use immediately to support SEL and trauma-informed practices. And that was a concern in some of our questions today. You can register today on our website. We also hope to see you at our virtual Power of Engagement conference in February. As soon as the webinar comes to a close, a brief survey will appear. We appreciate you taking a few moments to complete the survey. Your feedback is very valuable in that it provides insight for us in what you most appreciated in this series and how we can improve future webinars. Thank you all, stay safe, and have a great day.